They said she was a spoiled British princess playing gangster. He was a Korean street rat who clawed his way to the top with blood on his hands. When two mafia bosses were forced into marriage to save their empires, everyone expected war. What they got was so much more dangerous. Before we dive into this story of pride, power, and passion that burns hotter than revenge, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because trust me, you do not want to miss how this story unfolds. And drop a comment right now telling me, would you marry your enemy to save everything you've built? Now let's get into it. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Celestine Cross's penthouse headquarters like bullets, each drop a reminder that storms were coming from more than just the sky. At 25 years old, Celestine had learned to read danger in the silence between words, in the nervous glances her crew exchanged, in the way Marcus, her most trusted lieutenant, couldn't quite meet her eyes. She stood behind her father's mahogany desk, the same desk where she'd sat 6 years ago at 19, alone and terrified, surrounded by men who'd bet money she wouldn't last a month. Now that desk was hers. The office was hers. The empire was hers. Every inch of territory, every loyal soldier, every strategic alliance, she'd earned it with sleepless nights and ruthless decisions that would have broken most people twice her age. Tonight, Celestine wore a black Alexander McQueen suit tailored so precisely it looked like armor. Her natural curls were pulled back in an elegant low bun, gold hoop earrings catching the light, her mother's Nigerian wedding necklace hidden beneath her silk blouse like a secret. She looked every inch the queen she'd become. But looking at the grim faces of her inner circle, Celestine felt that old fear creeping back. The fear that everything she'd built could crumble in an instant. "Tell me," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. British accent sharp and controlled. Every syllable precise. No room for weakness. Never room for weakness. Marcus stepped forward. A mountain of a man at 6'3" with dark brown skin and eyes that had seen too much violence. He'd been her father's right hand before cancer took Marcus Cross 6 years ago. Now he was hers. Loyal until death. The closest thing to family she had left. 3 major routes hit in 2 weeks, Marcus said, laying photographs on the desk. Warehouses reduced to ash, trucks riddled with bullets, bodies covered with sheets. 17 men dead, millions in losses. "Boss, this isn't random. Someone's coming for us." Celestine's perfectly manicured fingers, nails painted a deep burgundy, traced the edge of one photograph. Her face betrayed nothing even as her mind raced through possibilities. Rivals? The Italian families had been quiet lately. The Irish? No. They knew better than to start a war with the Cross Empire. Not after what she'd done to their leadership 3 years ago. Unless... "Show me the signatures," she commanded. Marcus hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. He slid another folder across the desk. Celestine opened it, her dark eyes scanning the intelligence reports, and felt ice slide down her spine. Russian tactical patterns, professional execution, military-grade weapons. "Zakharov," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. Viktor Zakharov, the Bratva boss who'd been systematically conquering Eastern Europe for the past decade, leaving a trail of bodies and broken empires in his wake." Celestine had heard the stories. Entire families wiped out. Territories absorbed. Rivals who disappeared and were never found. And now he was expanding west. "We can't fight the Bratva alone," said James, her financial advisor, his voice tight with fear. "They have resources we can't match. Military connections, political protection in a dozen countries." "Then we find allies," Celestine said, her voice hard as diamond. She hadn't survived 6 years by accepting defeat. "Reach out to..." Her phone buzzed against the mahogany surface. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Miss Cross? An elderly voice, familiar but distant. This is Edward Park. I was your father's attorney. Celestine's blood went cold. Her father's attorney. The man who'd read the will, who'd overseen the transfer of power. She hadn't heard from him in 6 years. Why now? Mr. Park, what can I do for you? We need to meet. Tonight. There's a clause in your father's will you need to know about immediately. A clause about succession in the event of significant external threat. The room spun. Celestine gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles going pale against her brown skin. What kind of clause? Not over the phone. My office in 1 hour. Come alone. The line went dead. Celestine stood there for a moment, phone still pressed to her ear, feeling the weight of something terrible approaching. Marcus watched her with concern. Boss? Get the car, she said quietly. I need to see Park. As she walked out of her office, Louboutin heels clicking against marble floors, Celestine didn't know that 7,000 miles away, another mafia boss was receiving a similar call. And that call would change both their lives forever. 7,000 miles away, in a basement that smelled of blood and sweat and fear, Ryu Taejoon watched 2 of his fighters spar in the ring. The underground gym was where he'd trained since he was 8 years old. First to survive, then to dominate, and finally to build an empire that stretched from Seoul to Busan, to every shadow where money and power exchanged hands. At 30, TJ had everything he'd ever fought for. Respect, territory, an organization of 300 loyal soldiers who would die on his command. He'd taken the scraps Lee Daehan had left him when the old boss died 5 years ago and turned them into something that made other mafia families nervous. Tonight, TJ wore a black Tom Ford suit tailored to emphasize his broad shoulders and muscular chest. The jacket was cut perfectly to suggest the power underneath, to remind everyone who looked at him that he was violence contained in expensive fabric. His dark hair was styled back from his face, revealing sharp features and eyes that promised death to anyone stupid enough to cross him. A Patek Philippe watch glinted at his wrist, a reminder of how far he'd come from the orphan street rat everyone had expected to die young. But tonight, watching his fighters trade blows, TJ felt the old instinct screaming danger. The door to the gym burst open. Kang Woo-jin, his sworn brother since they were kids in the orphanage, strode in with tension radiating from every line of his body. Woo-jin never showed fear. The fact that he was showing it now made TJ's hand move instinctively toward the gun holstered under his suit jacket. Hyung, we need to talk. Now. TJ followed Woo-jin into the private office, a sparse room with security monitors covering every inch of his territory. 3 screens showed static where there should have been live feeds. The Busan shipment, Woo-jin said without preamble. Gone. Entire crew dead. Professional hit. Military-grade weapons. TJ's face remained perfectly calm, but inside, calculations were spinning. Busan was supposed to be untouchable. He'd paid every necessary bribe, eliminated every potential rival. Someone had gotten through his defenses like they were made of paper. How many dead? 23. TJ's jaw clenched. 23 men. 23 families he'd have to compensate. 23 funerals he'd attend while maintaining the mask of strength that kept his empire from fracturing. Who? Intelligence says Russian. Zakharov's signature all over it. There it was. The name TJ had been expecting and dreading. Viktor Zakharov, the Bratva monster who was swallowing territories like a plague. TJ had known this day would come eventually. You didn't build an empire without making enemies. But he'd hoped for more time. How long until he moves on Seoul? Weeks, maybe less. Woo-jin's face was grim. Hyung, we can't fight the Bratva alone. We need allies, serious allies. Before TJ could respond, his phone rang. Private line. Only 3 people had this number. He answered without speaking. Taejoon The voice made TJ straighten instinctively. Elder Kim, Lee Dae-han's former advisor, the man who'd taught TJ everything about strategy and survival after Dae-han took him and Woojin off the streets 22 years ago. Yes, Ajasi. We need to meet, tonight. There's something you need to know about Lee Dae-han's will. Something he put in place before he died. TJ's instinct screamed warning. What kind of something? Not over the phone. My house in 1 hour. Come alone. The line disconnected. TJ and Woojin exchanged looks. Whatever was coming, it was bigger than either of them had anticipated. Get the car, TJ said quietly. Something tells me our lives are about to change. He had no idea how right he was. Edward Park's office looked like it hadn't changed in 30 years. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, the smell of old paper and older secrets. Celestine sat across from the elderly attorney, her spine straight, hands folded in her lap, cream Burberry coat draped over the chair beside her. Every inch the queen her father had raised her to be. Your father was a brilliant man, Park began, his weathered hands resting on a thick manila folder. He understood that empires fall not because of external threats, but because of internal weakness, succession disputes, power vacuums, families torn apart by grief. Get to the point, Mr. Park. The old man smiled sadly. Direct. Like him. He opened the folder. When your mother died, Marcus knew it would devastate your brother. He also knew that Ezekiel was not suited for leadership. Too emotional. Too easily broken. Celestine said nothing, but her fingers tightened in her lap. Her brother. The ghost who'd abandoned her 6 years ago, unable to handle their parents' deaths, leaving her alone at 19 to face vultures circling the empire. She'd cried for him for months, hoped he'd come back. Slowly, that hope had turned to anger, then to ice-cold acceptance. Ezekiel had made his choice. So your father made arrangements, Park continued. A clause in his will that would only activate in the event of a significant external threat to the Cross Empire. A clause designed to force you into an alliance powerful enough to weather any storm. What kind of alliance? Park slid a document across the desk. Celestine read it once, twice. Her vision blurred at the edges. Marriage, she said flatly. He arranged a marriage. A strategic alliance through marriage, yes, with the Lee family of Seoul. Your father and Lee Dae-han were old friends. They understood that their empires would face threats neither could survive alone. The clause states that upon confirmation of a significant external threat, you must marry within 6 months, or control of the Cross Empire reverts to your brother. Celestine felt the room tilt. Ezekiel? He abandoned us. He doesn't want the empire. He doesn't. But the clause doesn't specify that he must want it, only that he can claim it if you fail to comply. And if I refuse the marriage? Park's silence was answer enough. Celestine stood, her 5'8" frame seeming to fill the room. She paced to the window, stared out at London's glittering lights. Her city, her empire, everything she'd built, everything she'd sacrificed, everything she'd proven, gone. Given to a brother who'd run away when things got hard. Who? Her voice was barely a whisper. Who am I supposed to marry? Ryu Taejoon, Lee Dae-han's heir, the current head of the Lee organization in Seoul. A name she'd never heard, a man she'd never met, a stranger who would become her husband because 2 dead men had decided her fate before she was old enough to have a say. I need details. Everything. His organization, his reputation, his... I'll have a full dossier prepared by morning. Park's voice softened. Miss Cross, your father wouldn't have done this if he didn't believe it was the only way to protect you. Protect her. By selling her to a stranger. By taking away her choice. By treating her like a commodity to be traded for security. Celestine turned from the window, her face a mask of cold control. When does the clause activate? Zakharov's attacks constitute a significant external threat. As of tonight, you have 6 months. 6 months to accept being sold, or lose everything she'd built. I understand. Thank you, Mr. Park. She walked out with her head high and her heart in pieces, the Tom Ford black orchid perfume she wore leaving a trail of elegance and barely contained rage. Elder Kim's house was a traditional Korean home in an expensive neighborhood where everyone knew not to ask questions about their neighbors. TJ sat across from the old man in a room that smelled of incense and memory, his broad frame seeming too large for the delicate space. Lee Dae-han saved your life, Elder Kim began without preamble. Took you and Woo Jin off the streets, gave you purpose, taught you everything. When he died 5 years ago, he left you his empire. But not unconditionally? TJ's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Elder Kim slid a document across the low table. Read. TJ read. Each word felt like a punch to the gut. Marriage, he said finally, his voice deadly quiet. He arranged a marriage. An alliance. Lee Dae-han and Marcus Cross were friends decades ago. They understood that their organizations would face threats requiring united strength. The will states clearly, you inherit full control of the Lee Empire only upon fulfilling the marriage alliance. Otherwise, control goes to the Kim faction. The Kim faction. Rivals within his own organization who'd been waiting years for an opportunity to seize power. TJ had kept them in check through strength and strategy, but with Zakharov threatening, his position was more vulnerable than it had been in years. And if I refuse? Then you lose everything Dae-han left you. Everything you've built. TJ stood, paced, his movements controlled violence. He could fight, could eliminate the Kim faction, damn the consequences. But with Zakharov moving on his territory, an internal war would destroy him. Who? The word came out like gravel. Celestine Cross, Marcus Cross's daughter, current head of the Cross Empire in London. TJ had heard the name. The British princess who'd inherited her father's organization and somehow hadn't gotten herself killed yet. He'd assumed she was a figurehead, a pretty face while men did the real work. European crime families were soft, especially the women. I need information. Everything on her and her organization. I'll arrange it. Elder Kim's expression softened slightly. Taejoon, I know this isn't what you wanted. But Lee Dae-han wouldn't have done this without reason. Together, you and the Cross family control routes from Asia to Europe. Zakharov can't touch that. When? The clause activates immediately due to Zakharov's attacks. You have 2 weeks to arrange the marriage. 2 weeks. 14 days until his life changed forever. TJ walked out into the Seoul night, his phone already dialing Woo Jin. The Dior Sauvage cologne he wore mixed with the night air, expensive and dangerous. Find everything about Celestine Cross. I want to know what we're getting into. If you're still with me, hit that like button right now because this story is about to get so much more intense. Drop a comment telling me, do you think arranged marriages can ever work? Let's see what you think. 3 days later, TJ sat in his office, surrounded by files on Celestine Cross. Photos covered his desk. Her at galas in designer gowns that hugged her curves, at business meetings in sharp suits that screamed power, walking through London with the confidence of someone who owned every street she touched. She was beautiful, devastatingly so. Light caramel skin that seemed to glow in photographs, natural curls styled in elaborate ways that looked both elegant and intentional. A face that belonged on magazine covers. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes that even in still photos looked like they could cut through lies. But TJ had learned long ago that beautiful women were the most dangerous. They expected the world to hand them everything, and men were usually stupid enough to comply. What do we know? TJ asked Woo Jin, who stood reviewing his own stack of intelligence reports. Celestine Cross, 25 years old. Born in London to Marcus Cross and Adaize Okafor. Father was British Mafia, mother was Nigerian. Both died 6 years ago in a car accident that intelligence suggests wasn't an accident. TJ's eyes sharpened. Assassination? Possibly. Never proven. She inherited at 19. Her older brother Ezekiel abandoned the organization immediately, unable to handle the grief. Left her completely alone. TJ filed that information away. A brother who ran when things got hard. Weakness. Exactly what he'd expected from people who inherited power instead of earning it. Operations? TJ prompted. Luxury car theft rings, high-end art forgery, cryptocurrency laundering, legitimate front companies in real estate and shipping. Revenue approximately £200 million annually. That's up from 60 million when she inherited. TJ paused. She tripled revenue in 6 years? Yes. Also expanded territory significantly. Has alliances with Nigerian syndicates, French connections, even some Italian families. Her crew is loyal, no significant defections, no internal power struggles. Woo Jin looked up from his reports. Hyung, she's not just a figurehead. She actually runs this empire. TJ snorted, leaning back in his leather chair, the fabric stretching across his broad shoulders. European crime is soft. Art forgery and cryptocurrency. Where's the real violence? The territory wars. The blood? There's plenty of blood, actually. 3 years ago, the Irish tried to move on her territory. She eliminated their entire leadership in one night. Professional, surgical, devastating. They haven't tried again. TJ studied a photograph of Celestine at some London gala, dripping in gold jewelry, smiling at the camera with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Cold, calculated. Everything he despised about people born into power. She inherited her empire, TJ said flatly. Daddy handed it to her on a silver platter. Oxford education, designer clothes, probably never got her hands dirty in her life. She was 19 and alone, Hyung. That's not easy. It's not the same as building from nothing. TJ's voice was hard as stone. We were orphans, remember? 8 years old, living in that hellhole, fighting for scraps. We earned every inch of what we have. She was born into wealth and privilege. Woo Jin said nothing, but his expression was skeptical. TJ threw down the photographs with disgust. She's a spoiled princess playing gangster, probably expects me to bow down and worship her because she's beautiful and educated. Well, she's about to learn this is my world, my empire, my rules. Somewhere in the universe, fate was laughing. In London, Celestine sat in her office, staring at files on Ryu Taejoon with growing contempt. Surveillance photos showed a man who looked like violence incarnate, broad shoulders that strained against expensive suits, intense dark eyes that promised pain, scars visible even in photographs. Every picture showed him surrounded by armed men, radiating the kind of casual menace that made people step aside. Tell me, she commanded, not looking up from the files. Marcus stood beside her desk, his mountain frame a comforting presence. Marcus cleared his throat. Ryu Taejoon, age 30, orphaned at 8 with his sworn brother Kang Woo Jin, lived in state facilities until age 12, when Lee Daehan recruited them off the streets. Lee Daehan, Celestine murmured. Father's old friend. The one who sent us that silk tapestry when I was a child. Yes, ma'am. Daehan trained both boys personally. They rose through ranks quickly. When Daehan died 5 years ago, Taejoon inherited the organization. It's grown significantly under his leadership. Operations? Cybercrime, illegal gambling, smuggling routes through Busan ports, also protection rackets, underground fighting rings, some weapons trafficking. Revenue estimated at $300 million annually, extremely violent, 37 confirmed kills personally, more ordered. Celestine's lip curled in disgust. A thug? A successful thug, ma'am. He's known as the architect because he builds empires through strategy. But yes, violence is his primary tool. She studied a photograph of Ryu at some business meeting, his face cold and expressionless, looking at someone with the kind of stare that promised death. No culture, no refinement. Just a street rat who'd learned to wear expensive suits while remaining a savage underneath. What else? No wife, no serious relationships on record. Reputation is, he's not someone who respects women in power. His organization is entirely male leadership. Traditional, patriarchal structure. Perfect. Celestine closed the file with barely contained fury. Of course her father would arrange for her to marry a misogynistic brute who probably thought women belonged in kitchens or bedrooms. A man who'd built his empire through violence and intimidation, with no understanding of strategy or finesse beyond hitting things until they broke. A man who would look at her and see nothing but a pretty face to control. He'll try to dominate me, Celestine said quietly, her British accent sharp with anger. Try to take over my empire, treat me like decoration. What will you do? Celestine's smile was cold and sharp enough to draw blood. Make it very clear that I'm not some submissive wife he can control. This is a business arrangement. He stays in his world, I stay in mine. And if he tries to treat me like anything less than an equal, he'll learn exactly why they call me the Duchess. Marcus looked worried. Ma'am, he's dangerous. So am I. Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought with guns and knives. They're fought with pride and prejudice, with two people who've already decided they hate each other before they ever meet. Keep watching to see what happens when these two collide. Hong Kong. Neutral ground. That's what the lawyers had insisted on. Neither Seoul nor London, but Hong Kong, a city where both empires had enough presence to feel secure, but not enough to start a war. The private room in the Peninsula Hotel was decorated in tasteful neutrals, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Victoria Harbour. Attorneys for both families sat at a long conference table, documents spread out like weapons between them. Celestine arrived precisely on time, her entrance calculated for maximum impact. She wore a cream Burberry suit that fit like a second skin, emphasizing her curves while maintaining perfect professionalism. Her natural curls were styled in an elegant low bun that showed off her bone structure. Gold hoop earrings glinting at her ears, her mother's necklace hidden beneath the silk of her blouse. She moved with the confidence of someone who owned every room she entered, her Christian Louboutin heels clicking against marble floors like gunshots. The lawyers stood immediately. She barely glanced at them, her attention focused on the man who hadn't bothered to stand. Ryu Taejoon sat at the head of the table in a black Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. The jacket was tailored to showcase his broad shoulders and muscular chest, the fabric stretching perfectly across his frame. His dark hair was styled back from his face, revealing sharp features and eyes that assessed her with cold calculation. He looked at her the way a general might study an enemy position, not with attraction or interest, but with the detached evaluation of a threat to be neutralized. He let her stand there for 10 seconds, making her wait, before finally rising with deliberate slowness. Power play. Celestine had expected nothing less from a man like him. "Miss Cross," he said in English, his accent slight but present. Deep voice, controlled, completely devoid of warmth. "You're late." "I'm precisely on time," Celestine replied coolly, taking the seat across from him without waiting for invitation. "Perhaps your watch is fast." Something flickered in his dark eyes. Annoyance? Amusement? Impossible to tell behind the mask of control he wore like armor. "Shall we begin?" Attorney Park suggested nervously. For the next hour, lawyers droned through merger terms, territory divisions, operational boundaries. Celestine listened with half her attention, the other half focused on the man across from her. Ryu Taejoon was exactly what she'd expected. Cold. Arrogant. Radiating that particular brand of masculine confidence that came from men who'd never had anyone tell them no. He sat like he owned the room, barely listening to the attorneys, occasionally asking sharp questions that revealed a mind for strategy she grudgingly respected. But every time he looked at her, she saw the judgment in his eyes, the dismissal. He'd already decided who she was before they'd even met. Spoiled princess, daddy's girl, decoration pretending to be powerful. The living situation, Attorney Park was saying. The clause requires cohabitation for the marriage to be legally binding for inheritance purposes. Both families must agree on Seoul, Ryu said flatly, interrupting like the lawyer's words were irrelevant. She'll live in Seoul. The room went silent. Even the lawyers looked uncomfortable. Celestine took a slow breath, feeling fury ignite in her chest like a lit match hitting gasoline. Excuse me. You heard me. Ryu's eyes met hers, cold and immovable as stone. This marriage is a business arrangement. My business is in Seoul. Therefore, we live in Seoul. My business is in London. Then manage it remotely. The sheer audacity, the absolute arrogance of this man who thought he could dictate her life like she was some employee he'd just hired. Celestine leaned forward, her voice dropping to something soft and deadly. Let me be clear, Mr. Ryu. I've run my empire for 6 years. Successfully. I'm not abandoning it to play house in a city where I know no one and understand nothing. And I'm not moving to London. His voice matched hers, quiet, controlled, absolutely unbending. My world. My rules. This isn't your world, it's our marriage. In name only. Something sharp entered his tone. Let's not pretend this is anything but a contract. You need protection from Zakharov. I need to secure my inheritance. We fulfill our obligations, maintain a united front publicly, and otherwise stay out of each other's way. Celestine wanted to throw something at his arrogant face, wanted to walk out and let him lose his empire. But she couldn't. The stakes were too high. Her crew depended on her. The empire her father had built, that she'd tripled in size, that she'd bled for. It all depended on her swallowing her pride and accepting this man's terms. Fine, she bit out, each word tasting like poison. Seoul. But I maintain full operational control of London, no interference in my business. Agreed. I have no interest in art forgery and cryptocurrency. The contempt in his voice was barely veiled. Like her empire was a child's hobby compared to his real work. Her hands clenched under the table, nails digging into her palms. Anything else, Mr. Ryu? Or can we finish this farce? One more thing. He leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was an insect pinned to a board. I've read about you. Oxford-educated, daddy's little princess, handed an empire and somehow haven't managed to destroy it yet. Impressive, I suppose, for someone who's never had to really fight for anything. The words hit like slaps. Celestine felt her control crack. Felt 6 years of sleepless nights and ruthless decisions, and proving herself over and over again, rise up in her throat like bile. And I've read about you, she said softly, each word precisely enunciated. Orphan who murdered his way to the top. How very primitive. Tell me, Mr. Ryu, do you even own books? Or is your idea of strategy just hitting things until they break? The temperature in the room dropped to Arctic. Ryu's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. His hands, resting on the table, slowly curled into fists. The lawyers looked like they wanted to flee. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. This is going to be a very long 2 years. The longest of my life, Celestine agreed, her dark eyes locked on his in open warfare. They signed the marriage contract with hands that wanted to reach across the table and strangle each other instead. The attorneys looked like they were witnessing the beginning of World War III. Neither TJ nor Celestine looked away from their silent war. And somewhere in the universe, fate was still laughing, because these two had no idea what they'd just agreed to. The wedding was scheduled for 10 days. Neither bothered to say goodbye. 10 days passed in a blur of preparation and cold fury. Celestine returned to London, threw herself into arranging her empire to function without her constant presence. Marcus would handle operations. She set up secure communication channels, redundant systems, backup plans for the backup plans. Everything to ensure that when she was trapped in Seoul with her arrogant new husband, her empire wouldn't crumble. The wedding dress arrived from a designer she'd never met. White, traditional, expensive. She hated it on sight but wore it anyway because image mattered. Even in a sham marriage, appearances had to be maintained. TJ spent those 10 days eliminating threats, securing alliances, making it clear to everyone in his organization that he was still in control. The marriage changed nothing. He was still the architect, still the boss, still the man who'd built an empire from blood and strategy. He didn't think about the woman he was about to marry. Didn't let himself wonder what it would be like to share space with someone who clearly despised him. It didn't matter. She'd learn her place soon enough. Both of them were completely unprepared for what was coming. The wedding took place in Seoul, in a massive venue that mixed Korean and Western aesthetics in a way that satisfied no one. It was lavish and menacing in equal measure. Armed guards everywhere, mafia families from across Asia and Europe in attendance. This wasn't a celebration. It was a business summit disguised as a wedding, every guest calculating what this alliance meant for their own power. Celestine arrived at the venue in a car with tinted windows, her stomach in knots. She'd barely slept the night before, going over every possible scenario, every way this could go wrong. But when she stepped out of the car, her face was perfectly composed, the Duchess in all her glory. The wedding dress was a custom white gown that fit her like a dream, emphasizing her figure while maintaining elegance. Her natural curls were styled in an intricate updo woven with small white flowers and gold accents, a subtle nod to her Nigerian heritage. She wore her mother's gold necklace openly for the first time, letting it rest against her collarbone like armor. Her makeup was flawless, emphasizing her high cheekbones and dark eyes. She looked like a queen walking to her execution. Inside the venue, hundreds of eyes turned as she appeared at the back of the aisle. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The English Rose, the Black Duchess, Marcus Cross's daughter. They'd heard the stories, but seeing her in person was different. She commanded attention effortlessly, moving down the aisle alone because her father was dead, and her brother was gone, and she'd learned long ago that she didn't need anyone to give her away. She belonged to herself. At the altar, Ryu Taejoon waited in a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a weapon. His broad shoulders filled the jacket, his expression was carved from stone, his dark eyes tracking her approach with the same cold assessment from Hong Kong. No warmth, no emotion, just calculation. He watched her walk toward him and felt nothing, or told himself he felt nothing. She was beautiful, yes. Stunning even. The dress showcased a body that would make most men lose their minds, and her face was the kind that launched empires and wars. But beauty meant nothing to TJ. He'd learned that lesson young. Pretty faces could hide ugly souls, and this woman had already proven she thought she was better than him. Celestine reached the altar, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. But her face remained calm. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. The officiant began speaking in Korean, then English, covering both their worlds in a ceremony that felt hollow and transactional, vows that meant nothing, promises that were really just business terms. TJ spoke his lines clearly, firmly, with no emotion. Celestine matched him, her British accent crisp and controlled. "You may kiss the bride." TJ leaned in, gave her a brief, cold kiss that barely counted as contact. 2 seconds. Might as well have been a handshake. Nothing. No warmth. No acknowledgement that they'd just bound their lives together. Celestine felt something crack inside her chest but refused to show it. This was her life now. A contract with a man who couldn't even pretend to care for the cameras. The reception was worse. They sat at the head table, TJ speaking to his associates in rapid Korean, completely ignoring her. Celestine made polite conversation with the few guests who approached her, mostly people curious about the foreigner who'd married the architect. She caught Marcus's eye across the room. Her loyal lieutenant looked worried. She gave him the smallest nod. "I'm fine. I can handle this," even though she wasn't sure that was true. The first night as husband and wife felt like the longest of Celestine's life, and this was only the beginning. If you've made it this far, you're officially invested in this story. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because part 2 is going to blow your mind. Drop a comment. Team Celestine or Team TJ? Who do you think is more in the wrong here? The drive to TJ's estate was silent and tense. TJ was on his phone, speaking rapid Korean about business, completely ignoring the woman beside him in the car. Celestine stared out the window at Seoul passing by, a city she didn't know, in a country where she didn't speak the language, married to a man who treated her like an inconvenient piece of furniture. The estate was exactly what she'd expected. A fortress disguised as a home. High walls, armed guards, security cameras everywhere. Beautiful but cold, like everything else in her new life. Mrs. Han, the household manager, greeted them at the entrance. She was a stern woman in her 50s who barely glanced at Celestine before speaking to TJ in Korean. He responded briefly, then walked inside without looking back. Mrs. Han turned to Celestine with a tight smile. "I show you to your room." "Our room," Celestine corrected quietly. Mrs. Han's expression didn't change. "Your room. This way." The master suite was luxurious in the way that money could buy, but warmth couldn't create. King-size bed with expensive linens, walk-in closets, a bathroom that looked like a spa. One side of the closet was filled with clothes in Celestine's size, chosen by staff who'd never met her. Designer labels, beautiful pieces, but it felt like being dressed like a doll. "Mr. Ryu will join you later," Mrs. Han said, then left without waiting for a response. Celestine stood in the middle of the bedroom, still in her wedding dress, and felt the weight of her new reality settle over her like a burial shroud. This was her home now. This cold, beautiful prison, with a husband who couldn't even be bothered to show her to their room himself. She changed out of the wedding dress slowly, hanging it in the closet where it looked like a ghost. Put on comfortable clothes, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited. TJ arrived after midnight. She heard him in the bathroom, the shower running, the sound of him moving around. When he finally came to bed, he kept to his side, as far from her as possible without falling off the mattress. No goodnight, no acknowledgement, just silence. Celestine lay awake in the dark, her back to him, feeling the vast distance between them despite sharing a bed. This was her life now. A marriage that was really just a business contract. A husband who was really just a stranger who hated her. She didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that tears changed nothing, but something in her chest felt hollow and cold. On the other side of the bed, TJ lay equally awake, his body tense, hyper-aware of the woman beside him. He told himself it didn't matter. She was a means to an end, a necessary acquisition to secure his empire. In 2 years, this would be over, and they'd both go back to their separate lives. He told himself that, but some part of him, buried deep where he never looked, wondered what he'd actually agreed to. Neither of them knew that in 10 weeks, everything would change. That the walls they'd built so carefully would start to crack. That hate and desire were sometimes the same thing wearing different masks. But that night, they were just two strangers sharing a bed, pretending they felt nothing. The first week of marriage was a masterclass in cold coexistence. TJ left the estate every morning before Celestine woke, returning after midnight when she pretended to be asleep. They saw each other in passing, barely spoke beyond necessary formalities, existed in the same space like ghosts, haunting different dimensions. Celestine spent her days learning the layout of the estate, memorizing exits and guard positions because survival meant always having an escape route. She handled London business remotely, video calls at odd hours to match the time difference, encrypted messages to Marcus updating him on everything. Mrs. Han brought meals that Celestine ate alone. The household staff treated her with polite deference but kept their distance. She was the boss's wife, which meant she was untouchable but not necessarily welcomed. On the third day, Celestine ventured into the common areas of the estate, found some of TJ's crew in a sitting room, playing cards and speaking Korean. They noticed her immediately, conversation stopping, eyes assessing. She'd dressed carefully, a fitted black dress that was elegant but not revealing, her natural curls styled in a high bun, her mother's gold necklace visible. "Good afternoon," she said in English, her British accent cutting through the silence. They looked at each other uncertainly. One of them, younger than the others with a friendly face, stood and bowed slightly. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Ryu. I'm Minho. I speak English if you need anything." "Thank you, Minho. I was just exploring my new home." "Of course. Please, let us know if you need anything." She nodded and moved on, aware of their eyes following her. The English wife, the foreign woman their boss had been forced to marry. She could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their skepticism. Let them look. She'd spent 6 years proving herself to men who doubted her. She could do it again. On the 5th day, TJ came home early, around 9 p.m., and found Celestine in the library. She'd discovered it on the 2nd day. A room filled with books in multiple languages. She was curled in a leather chair, reading a Korean grammar textbook, a notebook beside her filled with careful notes. He stopped in the doorway, surprised. "You're learning Korean." She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. "I prefer to understand what's being said around me." "Smart. I'm aware." The ghost of something flickered in his expression. Amusement? Respect? It was gone too fast to tell. He nodded once and left. It was the longest conversation they'd had since the wedding. Celestine went back to her studies, ignoring the way her heart had sped up when he'd acknowledged her. It meant nothing. He was just surprised she wasn't sitting around being useless. That's all. By the end of the first week, a routine had established itself. TJ leaving early, returning late. Celestine managing her empire remotely, exploring the estate, learning Korean from Mrs. Han, who'd warmed to her slightly after discovering Celestine could cook Nigerian food and offered to teach her some recipes. Small connections forming despite the Cold War between the married couple. But routines were made to be broken, and their first real clash was coming. The breaking point came on day 8. Celestine was in the bedroom, packing a small bag, when TJ walked in. It was only 7 p.m. earlier than usual. He stopped when he saw the bag. "What are you doing?" "Packing. I'm flying to London tomorrow. There's business I need to handle in person." "No." The word was flat, absolute, infuriating. Celestine straightened slowly, turning to face him with deadly calm. "I wasn't asking permission." "You're not going to London?" TJ's jaw was set, his body language radiating dominance. "It's not safe. Zakharov is actively targeting both of us. I've run my empire for 6 years, without your protection. That was before you married me. Now you're a target." The words, "married me," sounded like a burden, like she was cargo he had to secure. Celestine felt fury ignite in her chest. "I'm not your property. I'm your business partner. Don't confuse the two. In this house, what I say goes. Is that how you see this? You give orders, I obey?" Her voice was soft, dangerous. "Did you miss the part where I'm not one of your soldiers? If it keeps you alive, then yes." He moved closer, his 6'2" frame looming over her 5'8". "You're my responsibility now, whether you like it or not. I'd rather die free than live as your pet." Something flashed in his eyes. Anger? Hurt? She couldn't tell. He stepped back, his face going cold again. "Fine, you go. I'm sending security with you. I have my own security. Now you have mine too, non-negotiable." They stared at each other, neither willing to bend. The air between them crackled with tension, with fury, with something else neither wanted to name. "This is exactly what I expected," Celestine said quietly. "You trying to control me, treating me like I'm incompetent. I'm trying to keep you alive. I don't need you to keep me alive. I've been doing that fine on my own." "Have you?" His voice dropped, dangerous. "Because from where I'm standing, you needed this marriage as much as I did. Or did you forget about Zakharov and your brother?" The truth of his words hit like a slap. She had needed this. Hated that she needed this. Hated him for being right. "Send your security," she said coldly. "But they stay out of my way." He nodded once. "They'll be ready tomorrow." He left without another word, and Celestine sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking with rage and something else she refused to examine. This was her life now. Constant battle, constant proof that she was capable, constant reminder that he saw her as weak. She wanted to scream. Instead, she finished packing, her movements precise and controlled. Tomorrow she'd be back in her city, her territory, her world. Away from this cold estate and colder husband, she couldn't wait. What TJ didn't tell her was that he planned to follow her to London himself. Not because he thought she was incompetent, but because the thought of her walking into danger without him there made something in his chest clench uncomfortably. He told himself it was just protecting an investment, nothing more. He was lying to himself, but he didn't know that yet. Sometimes the best lessons come from watching someone prove us wrong. Keep watching to see what happens when TJ finally sees Celestine in her element. 3 days later, TJ stood in the shadows across from a restaurant in London, watching through tinted windows as Celestine met with 3 men he recognized from intelligence reports. Rival crew leaders. Dangerous men. He'd told Woo Jin he was going to London to check on their European connections. Didn't mention it had anything to do with his wife. Positioned himself where he could observe without being seen, just to make sure his security team was doing their job. That's what he told himself. Inside the restaurant, Celestine sat across from the 3 men with perfect composure. She wore a deep emerald suit that made brown skin glow, her curls styled in elegant waves over one shoulder, gold jewelry glinting. She looked like power incarnate. TJ couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read body language. One of the men, the leader, was being aggressive. Leaning forward, making threatening gestures, trying to intimidate her. Celestine's expression didn't change. She leaned back in her chair, completely relaxed, and said something that made the man's face go red. Then it happened fast. The man lunged across the table. Before his hand could reach her, Celestine moved with precision that spoke of serious training. Caught his wrist, twisted, slammed his face into the table hard enough that TJ heard the impact from outside. The other 2 men reached for weapons. Gunfire erupted. TJ was moving before conscious thought. Gun drawn, bursting through the restaurant entrance. His security team was already converging, but he reached the scene first. Celestine had a gun in her hand. She'd grabbed it from somewhere, firing with controlled precision. Not panicking, not screaming, just calculating angles and taking shots like she'd done this 1,000 times. One of the attackers went down. She pivoted, fired again, hitting another in the shoulder. Her eyes met TJ's across the chaos. For a split second, surprise flickered in her dark gaze. Then she was moving again, using the table as cover, her movements efficient and deadly. TJ provided covering fire, and together they neutralized the threat in under a minute. When the smoke cleared, 3 attackers were down, none dead, but all incapacitated. Celestine stood there in her expensive suit, not a hair out of place, gun held professionally, breathing steady. She looked at TJ, then at the gun in his hand, then back at his face. "You followed me. I was in the neighborhood. In London, 7,000 miles from Seoul." He lowered his gun, studying her with new eyes. "You didn't tell me you could shoot like that. You didn't ask. You assumed I was decorative." The words hit harder because they were true. He had assumed, had looked at her beauty and elegance and education and decided she was soft. But the woman standing in front of him had just taken out trained attackers with cold efficiency. "I was wrong," he said quietly. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe. Like she'd expected him to make excuses instead of admitting fault. "Yes," she said simply. "You were." Police sirens wailed in the distance. Celestine holstered her weapon, smoothed down her suit, and walked past him without another word. Her security team fell in around her, and she disappeared into a waiting car. TJ stood there in the aftermath, his perception of his wife cracking like ice under pressure. She wasn't spoiled. She wasn't weak. She was dangerous in ways he hadn't anticipated. Had taken out threats without breaking a sweat, in designer heels and a suit that probably cost more than the gun she'd confiscated. For the first time since this arrangement began, TJ wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Not in marrying her, but in underestimating her. The ride back to the estate was tense. They'd taken the same flight back to Seoul, sitting in first class with an entire row between them, not speaking. TJ had tried to approach her at the airport, but she'd shut him down with one cold look. Now, in the car, the silence was suffocating. "Thank you," he said finally, "for your help back there." "I wasn't helping you, I was protecting myself." "Still, you're good in a fight." "I know." The absolute confidence in her voice, no bragging, just fact, made something stir in his chest. Respect. Maybe. Or something more complicated. "I underestimated you," he said, forcing himself to be honest. "I thought you inherited everything and never had to fight for it. I was wrong." She finally looked at him, her dark eyes unreadable. "Yes, you were. It won't happen again, won't it?" She turned away, looking out the window. "You've already decided who I am, TJ. One fight doesn't change that. Doesn't it? You think I'm spoiled, weak, daddy's princess playing at power. You've thought that since Hong Kong." He couldn't deny it. Wouldn't insult her by lying. "And you think I'm a thug with no class," he countered. "A violent brute who only knows how to hit things. You haven't proven otherwise." Fair enough. They'd both judged each other and found the other lacking. "Maybe we were both wrong," TJ said quietly. Celestine looked at him for a long moment, something complicated crossing her face. Then she turned away. "Maybe." It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't disagreement either. Back at the estate, their routine shifted subtly. TJ still left early and returned late, but now he asked her opinion on strategy. Not often. Just occasionally. Testing whether the woman he'd seen in London was real or a fluke. She answered his questions with sharp intelligence that impressed him despite himself. Saw angles he'd missed. Offered alternatives he hadn't considered. One night, he actually joined her for dinner. They ate in silence at first. the massive dining table feeling absurdly large for 2 people. Then he asked about her operations in London, and she answered. Asked about his cybercrime networks, and he explained. It wasn't warm, but it was less cold. Your Korean is improving, he said, noticing she'd been speaking simple phrases to Mrs. Han. I'm a fast learner. Why bother? You'll be gone in 2 years. She met his eyes across the table. Because I don't do anything halfway. Even temporary arrangements deserve proper effort. Something about that answer made his chest tighten. She was here, trapped in a marriage she didn't want, and still giving it her full attention. No half measures, no complaints. Just excellence because that's who she was. You're not what I expected, he admitted. Neither are you. What did you expect? A controlling misogynist who'd try to make me into a submissive housewife. He almost smiled. Almost. And? You're still controlling, but you're not trying to change me. Just contain me. Is that better? Marginally. They finished dinner in silence, but it was different now. Less hostile. More aware. That night, when they went to bed, the distance between them felt smaller, not because they'd moved closer physically, but because something had shifted. TJ lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of the woman beside him, her breathing, the scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating from her body. He told himself it meant nothing, but 3 a.m. found him still awake, his mind replaying the image of her in that London restaurant, fierce and beautiful and deadly, and he realized he was in trouble, because he'd married a woman who was supposed to be an obligation, a business arrangement, nothing more. And somewhere in the past 2 weeks, she'd become something else entirely. He just didn't know what yet. 3 weeks into the marriage, they'd settled into something that almost looked like partnership. TJ asked her opinion more often. She engaged with his world, learning about his operations, offering insights. They had dinner together most nights now, conversations about strategy and territory and threats. Marcus called from London, suspicious. Boss, you sound different. I'm fine, Marcus. You sure? Because you almost sound happy? Don't be ridiculous. This is still a business arrangement. But even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night. Celestine couldn't sleep, her mind racing with problems in London. She went to the kitchen around 3 a.m., found TJ already there, sitting at the island with a glass of whiskey. They looked at each other in surprise. Can't sleep? He asked. No. You? Never sleep well. She poured herself water, leaned against the counter. For a long moment they just existed in the silence. Then he spoke. Why did your brother leave? The question caught her off guard. Why do you want to know? Because it made you who you are. And I'm realizing I don't actually know who that is. Celestine studied him. He looked different at 3 a.m., less guarded. His hair was messy, his face showing exhaustion he usually hid. More human, less architect. He couldn't handle the grief, she said finally. When our parents died, Ezekiel just broke. I was 19, trying to hold everything together, and he walked away without looking back. That must have hurt. It destroyed me. The admission came out before she could stop it. I needed him, and he abandoned me. And you had to rebuild, alone. Yes. TJ nodded slowly. I understand that. Being alone. Having to prove yourself every day. Do you? You had Woo Jin, your sworn brother. I had no one. We had each other, but we were still orphans. Still had to fight for every scrap. The world doesn't care about orphans, Celestine. It eats them alive. It was the first time he'd used her first name. The sound of it in his deep voice made something flutter in her chest. We're not that different, she said softly. We both built empires from nothing. Just different kinds of nothing. I thought you had everything. Money, education, family legacy. I had a name, and a target on my back. Everything else, I built myself. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked, like he was seeing her for the first time. I'm sorry, he said, for assuming, for judging, for treating you like you were less than you are. Celestine's breath caught. She hadn't expected an apology, hadn't expected this man who radiated pride and control to admit fault. Thank you, she whispered. They stood there in the kitchen, 3 a.m. making everything feel surreal. The distance between them felt charged with something neither wanted to name. Tell me about your childhood, she said. About the orphanage. And he did. Spoke about hunger and violence and terror. About meeting Woo Jin and finding a brother. About Lee Dae-han saving them, teaching them, making them into something more than the scared kids they'd been. She told him about her mother, about learning Igbo and Nigerian traditions, about her father's impossible standards, about the day they died and how her world had shattered. Hours passed. Dawn started creeping through the windows. They'd moved closer without realizing it, sitting side by side at the island, their voices soft in the quiet house. I should try to sleep, Celestine said finally, though she didn't move. Yeah. TJ didn't move either. Their eyes met. For a moment, tension crackled between them. His gaze dropped to her lips. She didn't pull away. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. Business emergency. He had to take it. Sorry, he said, standing. I have to handle this. Of course. He walked away, phone to his ear, and Celestine sat there alone in the kitchen as dawn broke, her heart pounding. Something had shifted. Something dangerous and complicated and terrifying. She'd spent 3 weeks hating this man. Now she wasn't sure what she felt. That scared her more than any bullet ever had. The next few days were charged with new awareness. Every conversation felt weighted. Every accidental touch, electric. They were circling each other, cautious but curious, the walls between them starting to crack. TJ found himself wanting to come home earlier, wanting to hear her perspective, wanting to see her face light up when she talked about her empire. She was brilliant and fierce, and nothing like what he'd expected. Celestine caught herself watching him, the way he moved, the rare times he almost smiled, the moments when his control slipped and she saw the man underneath the armor. They were in trouble, and they both knew it. Because falling for your contract spouse was not part of the plan. On day 22 of their marriage, TJ found Celestine in the garden after dinner. She stood under the stars, wearing a simple dress, her curls loose around her shoulders. Beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Hey, he said softly. She turned, smiled slightly. Hey, I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. He moved closer. I've been thinking that maybe this doesn't have to be as terrible as we thought. What do you mean? I mean, he struggled for words. We're stuck together for 2 years. Maybe we could try being, I don't know, friends? Friends. Her voice was carefully neutral. Or something. Or something, she echoed. They looked at each other, the air between them thick with possibility. TJ wanted to touch her, wanted to close the distance, wanted things he'd told himself he wouldn't want. Celestine, TJ, Hyung. Woo Jin's voice shattered the moment. He was running toward them, face urgent. We have a problem. Zakharov just hit one of our warehouses. We need to respond now. The spell broke. TJ's face went hard and cold again, back to business. I'll be right there. He looked at Celestine one more time, something unspoken passing between them. Then he was gone, striding back to the house with Woo Jin, leaving her alone in the garden. Celestine wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold despite the warm night. They'd almost said something. Almost crossed a line. Almost become something more than enemies forced into alliance. But the world had other plans, and she had no idea that the real test of their fragile connection was only hours away. The attack came at dawn. Zakharov's men hit 3 of their combined locations simultaneously. Professional, coordinated. A message that said, "Your alliance means nothing." TJ and Celestine spent the day in the war room, coordinating responses, directing their people. They worked in perfect sync, her strategic mind complementing his tactical brilliance. By evening, they'd contained the damage and eliminated the immediate threats. "We make a good team," TJ said as they reviewed final reports. "We do," Celestine agreed, surprised by how true it was. They'd survived their first real crisis together. Proven that the marriage alliance wasn't just paperwork. Their empires could actually function as one. That night, there was a celebration. Small, just their inner circles. Woojin was there, and Sarah showed up unexpectedly. TJ's childhood friend, the woman who'd been conspicuously absent from the wedding. Celestine noticed her immediately. Beautiful in that delicate Korean way, with long, straight hair and doe eyes. The way she looked at TJ made everything clear. She's in love with him, Celestine realized, and TJ had no idea. Sarah approached during the evening, all smiles and politeness. "You must be Celestine. I've heard so much about you." "You must be Sarah. TJ's mentioned you." He hadn't actually. But the way Sarah's eyes lit up at the possibility made Celestine's stomach clench with something she refused to call jealousy. They made small talk, surface level and polite, both women assessing each other. Sarah excused herself eventually, but not before touching TJ's arm in a way that spoke of years of familiarity. Celestine told herself it didn't matter. This was a business arrangement. What TJ felt or didn't feel for other women was irrelevant. She almost believed it. Later that night, back in their bedroom, TJ found her standing by the window. "You okay?" "Fine, just tired. Today was intense." "Yes." He moved closer and she could feel the warmth of his body behind her. "We handled it well. Together." "We did." "Celestine?" His voice was soft. "I'm glad you're here." She turned to face him, her heart pounding. They were so close. His dark eyes were intense, searching her face for something. "TJ, I know this wasn't what either of us wanted. But maybe it's not as bad as we thought." "Maybe not." He reached up, his hand hovering near her face, not quite touching. The moment stretched, charged, and dangerous. Then his phone rang again. Always business. Always something pulling them apart. But he didn't move to answer it. Just looked at her, conflicted. "You should get that," she said softly. "Yeah." He stepped back, answered the phone, his expression shifting to business mode. Celestine turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. They were dancing around something neither wanted to name, building something fragile and terrifying, and she had no idea it was all about to come crashing down. Because across the city, Sarah sat in her apartment, staring at a pregnancy test with 2 lines, and making a decision that would destroy everything. The next morning started normally. TJ left early for a meeting. Celestine spent the morning on calls with London, handling a problem with one of their forgery operations. She was in the library when she heard voices from TJ's study. His voice. Deep. Controlled. And then a woman's voice. Sarah's voice. Celestine wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but she heard her name, heard the tone of desperation, and found herself walking toward the study. The door was cracked open. Inside, she could see TJ, Woojin, and Sarah. Sarah was crying, her beautiful face streaked with tears. TJ looked uncomfortable. Woo Jin looked confused and hurt. TJ, please, Sarah was saying. I need to tell you something. It's important. Sarah, whatever it is, we'll handle it. You don't understand. That night, your wedding night, when you came to meet me at the bar. Celestine froze. Her heart stopped beating. Every instinct screamed to walk away, to not hear what came next. But her feet wouldn't move. What about it? TJ sounded wary. We were both so drunk, and one thing led to another, and I didn't want to tell you, but... Sarah took a shaky breath. The world slowed down. Celestine could see it coming, could feel the words forming before they were spoken, like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Sarah looked up, her eyes finding Celestine in the doorway. Something flickered in her expression. Triumph? Guilt? Then it was gone, replaced by fear and desperation. I'm pregnant, TJ. Sarah's voice cracked. It's yours. The words hit like bullets. TJ went pale. Woo Jin looked like he'd been punched. And Celestine. Celestine felt her entire world shatter. She stood there in the doorway, watching the man she'd started to care for, the man she'd let past her walls, process the news that he'd gotten another woman pregnant. On their wedding night. Their eyes met across the room. She saw shock in his face, confusion, horror, but not denial. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I have pictures. From that night. I know you don't remember, but... She showed TJ the screen. Even from the doorway, Celestine could see it. Them at the bar. TJ shirtless in a bed. Sarah beside him. Intimate. Undeniable. How could someone even take pictures at that moment? The sheer audacity. The dark, cruel reasoning. She must have intended to mock her with it later. Something inside Celestine went cold and dead. All the walls she'd let down slammed back up higher than before. All the softness she'd started to feel turned to ice. She'd been a fool. Had started to believe this could be real. Had started to imagine a future that didn't end in 2 years. And he'd betrayed her before they'd even had a chance. TJ looked up from the photo, his face a mask of guilt and confusion. I don't remember. You were drunk, Sarah said softly, but it happened. And now... She touched her stomach. The gesture was like a knife to Celestine's chest. Woo Jin was staring at Sarah with an expression Celestine couldn't read. Heartbreak, maybe. Or recognition. Something was off about this whole scene, but Celestine couldn't process it, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. TJ's voice cut through the noise. Celestine, wait. But she was already turning away, walking with perfect composure back to the bedroom, every step measured, every breath controlled. The Duchess in all her glory, even as her world burned. Behind her she heard voices, TJ calling her name, Woo Jin saying something sharp in Korean, Sarah crying. Celestine closed the bedroom door behind her with a soft click, stood there for one moment perfectly still. Then she moved with cold efficiency, pulled out her suitcase, started packing. Designer clothes folded precisely, jewelry in its cases, every item a piece of the life she was leaving behind. Her phone buzzed, Marcus calling. She didn't answer, not yet. Not until she could speak without her voice breaking. The door opened. TJ stood there, his face anguished in a way she'd never seen. Celestine, please, let me explain. Explain what? Her voice was ice, British accent crisp and cutting. That you slept with her on our wedding night? That you got her pregnant while I was sleeping alone in this house? What exactly do you need to explain? I don't remember that night. I was drunk, but I didn't think. You didn't think. She turned to face him, her dark eyes blazing. Of course you didn't. Why would you? I'm just the contract wife, the business arrangement. She's the one you actually care about. That's not... Don't. She held up a hand. Don't lie to me. I've seen how she looks at you. How you two have history. I was stupid enough to think maybe we could have something real. But this? She gestured vaguely. This is what reality looks like. I didn't know, TJ said, and his voice cracked slightly. I swear to you, I didn't know. It doesn't matter if you knew. You still did it. On the night you married me, you went to her. The words hung between them, sharp and devastating. TJ ran a hand through his hair, the controlled architect completely undone. What do you want me to do? I want you to let me leave. Celestine. My name is Mrs. Ryu. Her voice was colder than he'd ever heard it. Or better yet, don't call me anything. This marriage is what it always was. A contract. Nothing more. You handle your pregnant girlfriend. I'll handle my empire, and we'll fulfill our obligations publicly while staying out of each other's way. She zipped the suitcase with finality. I'm going to London, for as long as I need. Don't follow me, don't call me, don't pretend any of this meant something. TJ looked like she'd shot him. It did mean something. The past few weeks were a mistake. She moved past him toward the door, her perfume trailing behind her. One I won't make again. Celestine, please. She paused in the doorway, didn't look back. Take care of her. Take care of your baby. That's where your responsibility lies now. Then she was gone, her heels clicking down the hallway like a death march. TJ stood in the empty bedroom, surrounded by her absence, and felt something in his chest crack open. He'd finally let someone past his walls. Finally started to care. Finally thought maybe he could have something more than a life of cold transactions and colder beds. And in one morning, it had all turned to ash. He'd hurt the only woman who'd ever seen him as more than the architect. And she'd never forgive him. In the hallway, Celestine walked with her head high, her suitcase in hand, her heart in pieces. Mrs. Han watched her go with sad eyes. Minho and the other crew members stepped aside as she passed, sensing the devastation radiating from her controlled exterior. Marcus was waiting outside with a car. Boss? Airport, now. He took her suitcase without questions, saw the pain she was hiding behind her mask, and simply opened the door. As the car pulled away from the estate, Celestine let herself look back once, saw TJ standing in the doorway, watching her leave, his face carved from stone and regret. She turned away, told herself she felt nothing, told herself this was always how it was going to end, told herself she didn't care. She was lying to herself. But sometimes lies were the only thing keeping you alive. The plane took off, Seoul disappearing below. Celestine sat in first class, staring out the window with dry eyes. She hadn't cried. Wouldn't cry. Tears changed nothing. Her phone buzzed with messages. TJ trying to explain. Woojin's text hinting at something possibly wrong with Sarah's story. Marcus asking what happened. She ignored them all. The world could burn. She didn't care. 7 hours stretched into eternity. 7 hours of replaying every moment, every conversation, every time she'd let her guard down, every smile she'd almost given him, every touch that had made her heart race. She'd been a fool, had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this forced marriage could become something real. That the man who'd looked at her in the kitchen at 3 a.m., who'd listened to her stories and shared his own, who'd made her feel less alone for the first time in 6 years, that man could actually care about her. But he'd gone to another woman, on their wedding night, had gotten her pregnant while Celestine slept alone in their bed, hoping he'd come home early, hoping he'd choose her. The humiliation burned worse than the betrayal. When the plane touched down in London, rain was falling. Of course it was. Even the sky was crying for her. Marcus had a car waiting, drove her to the penthouse in silence. The city lights blurred past the windows, familiar and foreign at the same time. She'd been gone less than a month. It felt like a lifetime. "Boss," Marcus said quietly as they pulled up to her building. "What happened?" "What always happens to women who trust men," Celestine said, her voice empty. "We get reminded why we shouldn't." She walked into her penthouse, the space she'd left as a reluctant bride returning as something else entirely. Colder. Harder. More alone than she'd ever been. The walls she'd spent 6 years building, the ones TJ had started to crack, slammed back into place. Higher. Stronger. Impenetrable. Never again. Never again would she let anyone close enough to hurt her. Not TJ. Not anyone. She stood at the window overlooking London, her city, her empire, her life, and made a promise to herself. This marriage would continue, because she had no choice, because her empire depended on it, because Zakharov was still out there, still hunting them both. But it would be exactly what TJ had said in Hong Kong. A contract. A business arrangement. Nothing more. She'd fulfill her obligations. Maintain the public facade, play the devoted wife when cameras were watching. But her heart? That was locked away now. Buried so deep that even she couldn't find it anymore. TJ had wanted a cold, professional partnership. Now he'd get exactly that, and nothing more. Not her laughter. Not her trust. Not the softness she'd been stupid enough to show him. Just business. The phone rang. TJ's name flashing on the screen. She watched it ring until it went to voicemail. Then ring again. And again. She turned off her phone. Somewhere in Seoul, TJ stood in his study, staring at Sarah's photos, trying to remember a night that had apparently changed everything. The images were there. The evidence undeniable. But his memory was blank. A black hole where that night should be. Woo Jin stood in the corner, watching his brother with an expression no one could read. Sarah had left after dropping her bomb, saying she needed time to process, that she'd be in touch about arrangements. "Hyung," Woo Jin said quietly. "Something about this doesn't... Don't." TJ's voice was raw. "Just don't." He'd lost her. The woman he'd started to care about, maybe even more than care about, was gone, and it was his fault. Even if he couldn't remember, the evidence was right there in his hands. He'd betrayed her on their wedding night, had destroyed the fragile thing they'd been building before it even had a chance to grow. The architect, who'd built an empire through perfect strategy and control, had made the worst mistake of his life, and he had no idea how to fix it. Back in London, Celestine finally moved from the window, walked to her bedroom, unpacked with mechanical precision, hung up clothes, put away jewelry, removed her wedding ring and placed it in a drawer. She caught sight of herself in the mirror. Still beautiful, still elegant, still the Duchess. But her eyes were different, colder, emptier. Dead in a way they hadn't been even when her parents died, even when her brother abandoned her. Because this hurt worse, this cut deeper. She'd let herself hope, had let herself believe, had let herself fall. And the landing had shattered something inside her that might never heal. Tomorrow she'd call Marcus, rebuild her walls, dive back into work. Remind London why they called her the Duchess. Remind herself why she didn't need anyone, why love was a weakness she couldn't afford. But tonight, alone in her penthouse with rain falling outside and her heart in pieces inside, Celestine Cross finally let herself break. She slid down the wall, her expensive suit wrinkling, her perfect composure cracking, and for the first time in 6 years, she cried. Cried for the girl who'd lost her parents, for the sister who'd been abandoned by her brother, for the woman who'd been betrayed by a husband she'd started to love. Cried until there were no tears left, until the pain crystallized into something cold and hard and unbreakable. Then she stood up, washed her face, fixed her appearance, put the mask back on. The Duchess was back, stronger than before, colder than before, more dangerous than before. And the world would remember why crossing her was a mistake. If you've stayed with me this far, you understand what it means to watch someone's heartbreak in real time. The subscribe button is right there, and I need you to hit it, because what happens next in part 2 will change everything you think you know about this story. Comment below and tell me what you would do if you were Celestine. Would you leave? Would you stay and fight? Would you lock your heart away or demand the truth? And here's the real question that's probably burning in your mind right now. Can a marriage built on contracts and lies ever become something real? The like button is how I know you're ready for what comes next. And trust me, you need to be ready, because secrets have a way of unraveling, and when they do, the explosion is catastrophic. Part 2 is where everything you think you know gets turned upside down. I'll see you there.